Welcome back. It's a cold, wet, rainy morning out there again at the apiary, so we're going to finish up some more of our winter beekeeping chores. Today we're going to be building feeders for the top of the hive to feed them sugar syrup. We use 3 different types of feeders. This is just one of the ones that we use. This one we use for hives that don't need a lot, but just you want to give them a little bit of syrup to kind of help stimulate that brood production and keep them going. We'll make a video later showing the other types of feeders that we use and the difference between them all, but this is the one we're making today. It sits on top of the hive. You get a mason jar or 2. I have 2 sets of holes there for them if we need to feed 2 jars at one time. Otherwise you just keep that covered to keep from propolizing the screen underneath. You get these lids. You find them in any beekeeping store. You can make them yourself if you want to. They're relatively cheap. In a mason jar we use quart size. If you can find the half-gallon sizes, those are good too. You fill it with sugar syrup and you just invert it on top of the board there, and the bees will take the syrup through the screen there. And it's an easy, cheap way that you can make it yourself. I'm using all materials that I've had here at the house. I didn't buy any of this stuff. This is just leftover plywood, leftover wood that we've got. Some screen that we use for the hive tops. And it's just, we're making some extras because we've got about 10 of these already made, so I made 8 more. Just make sure we have enough to feed nukes and splits or any swarms that we may catch this year. So let's get started. I'll show you what I'm doing here, how we're making it all, and then we'll see the finished product. So I've already pre-cut the board here, cut it to fit the top of a standard Langstroth hive, 19 7/8 inches long, 16.5 inches wide. And I've also pre-cut some shims here too that we're going to be gluing on the bottom. The shims keep it off the hive just enough that the bees can get up there and access the areas where the sugar syrup is, but it's not deep enough that the bees are going to want to build comb up in there, because they will, and they'll still try to build some comb up here. They'll put some propolis and try to seal the screens and stuff like that. But you want to kind of minimize that as much as you can. So we're going to take our board here, we're going to glue and staple our shims on, and then we'll cut our holes for our jars. I always glue and staple everything, that way it just makes sure it holds it better. Using Type Bond 2 glue here. Usually use Type Bond 3. It's a little bit stronger, but they didn't have any last time at the store, so the Type Bond 2 holds well. Just run a bead. Doesn't have to be much, just along the edge. Make sure that we get that extra hold. And the staples aren't the only thing holding it on. This is going to sit on top of the hive, so there's not going to be a lot of stress holding it together here, and the bees will definitely propolize this and make it stronger too, so you don't need a lot of glue. Get your little bead run down through there, and then we're going to take and place our shims along through here. Make sure you get the right side with the right side. We'll just pre-place everything, and then we'll get it all lined up and staple it in place. And because I'm using 3/4 inch plywood, I'm using 1.5 inch 18 gauge staples. If you're using a little bit thinner plywood, you can go with a little bit shorter staple there, but like I said, this is just what I had laying around the house, so this is what I decided to use. So we'll go ahead and we'll staple all these down. I don't use a lot of staples per side. I only use 3 on each side. Like I said, there's not going to be any weight being held. All the stuff's going to be sitting on these, so there's not going to be a lot of stress on these things. You're just making sure it's enough to hold it in place. Okay, now that that's done, that's all set to go sit on top of the hive. We're going to go ahead and drill our holes right here for our jars. We're going to use a 3-inch hole saw for that. That'll fit the lid of the jar perfectly. It'll let the lid sit down in there. So we're going to drill 2 holes. I use 2 because if I need to put 2 quarts on there, if it's a hive that's not here at the house in one of our other yards, It lets me put 2 jars on there. I have to go back and check on them as frequently. But if I don't use the second hole, I just put the cutout in. That keeps them from propolizing the hole, and just use 1 jar instead. They don't have to be perfectly centered, as long as you're away from the edges, because you're going to put a box on top of this to seal it off so the jars are inside a box. So don't put it too close to the edge. You got to leave enough room for your jar to sit in there comfortably, and don't put them too close together, because if you use 2 jars, then you got to have enough space for the jars to sit next to each other. Okay, there's our holes. 2 holes drilled out right there. Now, normally our next step would be to paint these. That way you're not getting any paint on the screen or anything like that. So it just so happens that Nick has already painted a couple of these for us. So we'll go ahead and start the next step, which is put our screen on here to keep the bees from coming out through here, give our jar something to set on, and let them still be able to take that feed. So we'll go ahead and we'll use one of the painted ones here, and we'll get Nick to paint this one a little bit later for us. Like I mentioned before in one of our previous videos, when we were painting our boxes, everything that we use to paint the boxes and stuff like that is oops paint. You can get it from Home Depot or Lowe's. It's stuff when they've mixed it that they've made a mistake on, so they sell it at a cheaper price. For instance, this gallon of paint right here was $9. You go to buy this as a premix, as a mixed paint that you want to paint your house with or something like that, you're looking at 30 bucks or so, at least at today's prices. So it's a good cheap way to get some paint. Just make sure that you're getting an exterior grade. We use latex paint. It's an exterior primer and paint together, so I always look to make sure that they get an exterior one, because it holds up a little bit longer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to staple our screens over these holes. We'll flip it upside down. I've already got the screens cut out. This is 1/8 inch hardware cloth that'll cover the holes like so. Keeps the bees from coming out of the holes, and will also help support those jars when we fill them full of sugar syrup. I glue around the holes to get a good seal, and I also use little scraps of wood that I've cut and staple those along the edges, making sure to overlap that hole just a little bit, because it gives that jar a little bit of support to sit on. If you don't, then it's going to be sitting on that screen and it's going to stress your screen. So I always overlap it, maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch whenever I do that. So we'll go ahead and prep our area here. We'll get our wood glue again, and we're going to go around the holes. This time we're going to do a continuous bead, because we want to get a seal all the way around through there and make sure that the bees can't escape through the holes. And that just makes it easier when you're feeding them. You just take the cover off. You don't have to worry about wearing a veil or anything like that, because this is all external to the hive. The bees won't have access to this area, so they're not going to come boiling out at your face and try to sting while you're trying to feed them. I like these hive top feeders for that reason. I can go through and feed the hives on a hot summer day, not have to put a jacket or a veil or anything like that on. A lot of people use internal hive feeders, which is good, but you got to open the hive and then get access to the bees. So this is easier in my opinion. We're going to set our screen on there for each of those holes. Now, because I'm using scrap that's a little bit thinner, I've switched to 18 gauge 5/8 inch staples. So we're going to overlap that hole by about 1/4 to 1/2 inch, and then just staple this board in place. It helps compress that screen against the glue bead that you just laid down, and helps secure that in there. Repeat the same for the other side over here. You can see we've stapled and glued our screens on the bottom right there. And if you look on this side, you can see that the wood is just along the edges right there. That way it gives that jar something to rest on, gives it a little bit extra support. Once that glue dries, it'll hold that jar up. That lid fits in there perfectly. And then if we need an extra to close it off, we just take our leftover scrap and just lay that in there. Keeps the bees from propylizing that hole, because if they see an opening and see light, they're going to want to propylize it and seal it up. They think it's a hole in the hive right there. So we're done with this. We're going to go ahead and also paint the bottom edge right here. Even though it sits on the hive, it's plywood, so any moisture will quickly delaminate that wood and cause it to warp and stuff like that. So we always paint this edge right here and just this inside edge here to seal that wood so that the moisture and humidity and stuff like that doesn't get to it. We don't paint this part because that's the bees access it, so there's no point in that. But a little bit of paint right here won't hurt. It's latex paint, so it's not bad for them. Okay, and just to give you an idea here how this is going to work, we'll take one of our boxes that Rachel's already started painting. She's working on a couple different hives. She paints a couple different ones every year. This is one of the ones she's working on right now. So just give you an idea. Got your hive top right here, your frames and your bees are inside there. You pop the top, and this just sits right on top of there like that. Your jar will sit on top to feed the bees. And then you set another box over top of here, then your inner and outer cover. That way it keeps all this internal to the hive. You don't have to worry about rain or anything like that. The screen's there, so when you pop the top, you don't have to worry about bees. They're all down underneath the screen. You can just refill these jars without any protective equipment on. And I like these. It's an easy way. It's cheap. You use the stuff here around the house, and as you saw, it doesn't really take us very long. It takes a little bit of time to cut out the wood and get the right sizes down, but once you get all that done, if you do, like we did 8, if you do a run of 8 or 10, you get all those cuts done, and it's pretty easy to assemble and get painted and made up. So thanks for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, post them down in the comments below. And once we get the feeders on, once it warms up a little bit, we'll go through and do a video on all the different types of feeders that we use and show you what we've got. Thank you.